Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We are continuing our series of SEC preview podcasts, one for each team, one for all 16 teams around the SEC. We're getting close to the middle alphabetically here. We started from the back. We're working our way to the front. And today we're going to talk about the Missouri Tigers, right there smack in the middle alphabetically. A Missouri team that, as we like to joke, that always gets picked last and rarely does.
Right.
Now, Mizzou would prefer that not just be finishing one or two spots above last place, as has often been the case, but certainly a program that we understand what the realities are, what the things that hold them back are, and yet you catch them at the wrong time and you can get got. Just ask Florida last year.
Yeah.
So, especially when you're playing them in Columbia, which is just a weird place to play. It's cold, it's windy. The place is kind of a graveyard for pitchers or for hitters. Right. If the wind, especially if the wind is blowing the right way, like it can be a bizarre place to play. And I was actually doing their preseason snapshot the other day, writing the little intro for it. And I don't think I really fully realized how close they came. And look, baseball's a zero-sum game, so you either win the game or you don't. But how close they came to winning series with both Kentucky and Georgia last year. And, again, ifs and buts, but we'd be having a little bit of a different conversation. I don't know if they would have been, if
that was enough, but
right. But
it would have been closer.
Yeah, exactly. We would have just been, we'd be having a very different conversation here, but it is what it is. So, last year's team, I think we can pretty fundamentally sum it up as they pitched well enough more often than not. Pitching stats, I mean, they weren't a big strikeout team, but other pitching stats wise, they were kind of right in the middle of the pack of the league. It was good enough on the mound for the most part, but the offense was just not good enough, like flatly not good enough. Far and away the worst offense in the SEC by most any measure. Batting average, they struck out a ton. They didn't take a lot of walks. They didn't have a lot of power. It just was such a production to score a run at times. And that's just a tough way to live. We've talked about it. We talked about it with Vanderbilt. We talked about Vanderbilt, where, Vanderbilt's obviously a better lineup, but they too tend to be a team that's scoring one or two runs at a time, and then you give up a 3-run homer and suddenly you're back to square one. And Mizzou knows that better than I think anyone in this league because of just how difficult it was for them to score. So if the offense isn't better, I don't see how they are much better, but that's what we're going to find out.
Yeah. You bring up a good point about their pitching, because it certainly kept them in games, and they were, as you mentioned, SEC average, which, that's pretty freaking good. That's a regional caliber pitching staff. If you're in if you're in that 8, say 6 to 10 range in the SEC from a pitching standpoint, those are some good teams. But offensively, they were last, and it wasn't close. And that's the part that we're all anxious to see. Well, one, can you replicate it on the mound? Because there were some really good arms that have moved on. And then two, how much better are you? Because you're probably not worse. So I do think that's the big question. And, when you're Missouri and everyone is outside of Columbia, Missouri, is picking you to finish last, it's you kind of should develop a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, right? That nobody believes in us. It's Mizzou against the world, that kind of thing. And that, in the early season, as you mentioned, has worked out pretty well. I mean, they upset Tennessee 2 years ago with the sweep. They got Florida last year. They were close in some other games, and they've got some good teams coming into Missouri early, like Texas comes in, right? I would think, Missouri's going to be a whole lot more excited to face Texas at home in Columbia than Texas is going to be to go up in the cold weather and deal with that. So, not calling it yet, but that would be a place that I would be concerned if I'm a Texas guy. I think the other part is, what does year 2 under Carrick look like? He certainly is doing it his way, bringing in a lot of freshmen, a lot of JC guys, not a lot of D1 transfers. And that's kind of different than some of the other teams in the league are doing it. So, it's when you're Missouri, maybe you do need to do things a little differently because you can't compete from a resource standpoint. So, hey, his his strategy is as good as any, right? Because Mizzou's certainly pushing that rock uphill since they joined the SEC. No regional appearances, since as an SEC member, and although they've been close, but I think just trying to replicate what the more healed teams are able to do is probably not the right approach. So I applaud the ingenuity. It's just a question of how successful is this particular method going to be, and it's an interesting early conference slate. They go into Puerto Rico, going to play some really good teams. Then they come back and they play UCF in a midweek game. That was a regional team last year. And then they're in the Andre Dawson Classic, and they're going to play, was it 3 HBCU teams? So on one hand, you should be able to have some success there and maybe gain some momentum, even if you don't in those in that first tournament in Puerto Rico because the opposition's so good. You could at least kind of come home with a positive feeling. And also, since those games are not at home, you're not taking the RPI hit that you typically would if those were 3 home games. So I kind of like it, honestly. Coming back, plus if you can play well in Puerto Rico, and that's even better, right? Maybe you go 2-1 there, and then you may, even if you don't win at UCF, then you get 3 wins. On the way home, I would feel pretty good about them. They also host Evansville. I mean, they're going to have some opportunities to win some games and have some momentum, but also find out what they have before the SEC wars start. I really like their pre-conference schedule.
Yeah, I think it's a well done schedule. I think it's right for who they are and where they are.
Right.
Testing themselves without going crazy with
Mm-hmm.
it. I was going back while you were talking and looking, and it is true that no matter kind of where Mizzou is at, they get somebody every year. Like it was Florida last year. 2 years ago, it was Tennessee before Tennessee got things really straightened out. The year before that, it was Georgia. Georgia went into the last weekend of the season at home, thinking that, hey, especially if we sweep this series, but if we win it, we could host. But they lose that series to Mizzou, and they finish 15-15, and that team just looked out of gas at that point. And so Mizzou kind of seemed to maybe put the nail in the coffin there for that team. But so they're going to get somebody. And I also like the bigger point you make of like, they just realize they have to do things a little bit differently. And so they are just saying like, hey, look, we're going to try to build this thing up the old school way. We're just going to take on, they got JUCO guys and they got high school guys, and, a couple of D1 transfers, but not really, to your point. And it's either going to work or it's not. And you look at their pitching staff, and, it's rotation guys could be Brock Lucas, Daniel Whistler, Will Libbert, Josh McDevitt. Those are all guys that have been in the program from the jump. They've got a freshman they really like in Brady Kalenbrink. Ian Losey's a program guy. They brought in a Columbia transfer named James Vaughn, who, that's one of the handful of Division I transfers, but that's mostly a pitching staff that are guys that arrived at Mizzou as their first Division I stop, and have kind of grown in the program. And it's, I think we said it a lot last year, but like it's one of those deals where Tim Jamison just kind of quietly goes about his job, and is pretty good at it and has a long track record of it. And you look at the pitchers, everyone, the eye is drawn to Max Scherzer and Kyle Gibson and Aaron Crow and guys like that, but it goes well beyond that. Just the pitching development at Mizzou, whether it was with Tim Jamison as a head coach or Tim Jamison in the last couple of years as an assistant coach at Mizzou, that's impressive development. Offensively, look, I mean, I do think let me take a step back. The way in which they tried to zig when everyone zagged in the SEC last year, it felt like hey, we're going to run. Like every guy in the lineup is going to be able to run. And, that's tough because you have to get on base to really be able to steal, unless you're just going to bunt for hits a bunch. And this year, like they've still got speed. I'm not trying to suggest they don't. But this year, at least in the projected lineup, it does feel like there's a little bit of more emphasis put on, okay, yes, we want to be athletic. Yeah, we're not going to be able to recruit maybe the physicality of LSU or Tennessee, or pick your high-end SEC club, but we do need to maybe
more
look
balance.
at some guys, right? More balance. So, obviously Jackson Lovich is back, and that's a big deal. And Brock Daniels is back, and he had a nice year last year. But I think about guys like the JUCO transfers and Garrett Goldbeck and Peyton Bosler from Kansas City, Kansas Community College, that are guys who have really high on base percentages, and both can run. But with Garrett Goldbeck in particular, it's like a over 500 on base percentage at junior college. And okay, SEC versus Midwest JUCO. Okay, we understand there's a little bit of a jump there, but that tends to be something that doesn't slump at the D1. Like, if you can work a walk and have a good eye, have plate discipline, like that tends to not, like, yes, they're throwing harder in the SEC. It'll be more difficult, but that does tend to be something that translates more so than, hey, I hit a bunch of home runs against JUCO pitching, as a sophomore, which that can be fool's gold. So I do like that approach of, hey, let's get guys who get on base. Let's see if we can create some traffic. And then, hey, we're still pretty athletic, so then we can make things happen once we get to that point. But they had to get on base more. Like, I mean, that's just the long and the short of it. I mean, I don't know that Mizzou has ever, even at Mizzou's peak when they were in the regionals every year in the Big 12, it's not like this was really a program that was on the forefront of hitting for power, because the ballpark is big and it's just cold and windy. And so they understand they can't build their lineup the same way that some other SEC programs can, but they can recruit to get on base a little bit more. And it feels like that's what this lineup construction is about this time around.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, one of the guys they added, the Memphis transfer, Pierre Seals, I mean, he could be the cleanup guy, man. I mean, he could come in and be an immediate impact bat. He's got some thunder. I do think that's what, to your point, with how many close games they played, how difficult it was at times to score runs, just having that threat in the middle of the lineup, even if he's, even if he's not coming through, even if you're pitching around him, that's at least one more threat and one more runner, that you're adding. And then maybe you don't need a 3-run bomb. Then maybe the double drives in 2, and then you're able to get another hit and you extend the inning, and then you're in the bullpen, right? And all of the builds on each other. And I think that's what I'm looking to see, is just more lineup depth, not be so reliant on, a few guys, because there were some automatic outs. I'm not calling anybody out, but there were some times that Mizzou just didn't, they weren't competitive enough at certain points in the lineup. And if that is where the first place has got to be addressed. You got to at least improve that. And if the middle lineup is better, then that's even, that's golden at that point. Because I think, if Tim Jamison does this year what he did last year, despite losing some really good pitchers, if they're middle of the SEC kind of staff again, and maybe that's ambitious, but if they are, and the offense is better, then they're not going to finish last. And I don't know who is, but it's just kind of been, that's just kind of what they do, man. They're just exceeding expectations, and people take them lightly for whatever reason, historically in this league. So I think there's an opportunity to exceed where they are, but it's just talk at this point. We've got to see it on the field.
One wild card on the mound to mention it. If you mentioned it and I missed it, Mark, I apologize. But Tony Newbeck is probably going to come back at some point this season. Now it's not like a, hey, day one, he's a full go kind of deal. So, I think they're kind of managing their expectations for it, but he is expected back at some point, and he was looking like he could be right up there with pick your top end SEC arm when he got hurt a couple of years ago. So we'll see if he can get back to that same level. But that certainly, if he's anywhere close to as effective as he was before he went down with injury, that's going to be huge for that pitching staff. So
Yeah,
That'll
total
be,
difference maker. Absolutely. If he and Jaden Pimental, who threw a good bit last year, if you've got those two who have experience, um, to be able to give them in roles, maybe they're piggybacking, to give you a little bit more depth there. I mean, that to me would be just a huge advantage for them as they try to rebuild the pitching staff. Logan Lunsford transferred to Wake. That's a loss. You go through 2 years of him, and then he gets to his junior year, and this is going to be his best in Mizzou, and he's gone. That's a blow. And then Ryan Magdish last year just came out of nowhere. And
yeah.
was just phenomenal, and he moved on to pro ball. So it's when you lose those kind of talented arms, somebody you need some help. You need either somebody to emerge, you got to bring somebody in, or maybe an injured guy like we talked about can come back and fill those innings, and not just fill the innings, but just have that. Okay, with this guy on the mound, we do match up with whoever top 10 team we're facing this week is going to trot out there, and I think just from a mental standpoint, that gives Missouri a big edge.
Yeah, it's you mentioned Pimental too, and in fairness, like in the preview stuff for Mizzou, he's not really been mentioned as a guy who's in the mix right now. I assume that's because maybe there's some sort of physical concern there. I don't have any sort of inside information. So that's not me trying to like hint at something. It's more me just actually asking the question. So that is something to monitor too, because he was really good. Quietly, extremely good last year for them. And so, yeah, having him back, even in a limited role, I think would be huge there. The final thing I want to talk about, Mark, and this is a little bit counterintuitive to the way you and I usually do this, because I think I don't want to speak for you totally, but I think you'll agree with this, but I will let you speak for yourself. I think we take pride. I think it's fair to say we take pride in talking about Mizzou in a way that they don't get talked about a lot with regards to SEC baseball. Like, we take seriously the idea that we're going to cover them with just as much rigor as everyone else. But in that is the reason why we say that, and the reason why that's important to us is because so often Mizzou gets dismissed, right, in this league from a baseball perspective. And on some level, I get it, right? Just not a lot of successes in the SEC. Everybody kind of clowns on the facility. So I get it. And normally you and I I think we do a good job kind of saying, okay, sure, maybe some of that's true, but we're still going to do our jobs. That being said, if you're Mizzou's administration, like, you got to give them some help. Yeah. Like, and maybe there's something happening that's another thing. Like, Mark and I have no inside information here. This is not us, like, again, trying to hint at anything, but we always talk about, man, like, the years that the Beezer teams got close to regionals, but just missed. And it's like, man, they're doing a good job with less. And it just stinks that there always has to be that caveat. Like, no one is saying that they need to go build Duty Noble 2.0 in Columbia, Missouri. But look around the league at some of the stuff that renovations are happening, or other schools that are kind of in a similar place. And it's, like, they're just behind in a lot of ways. And so whether it's facility stuff, whether it's, hey, let's throw some more NIL money their way, and maybe see if we can be a player in the portal, or, be a player to keep Logan Lunsford around. And I don't know if money was involved in that or not. I'm just saying, like, he left through the transfer portal. I want there to be some sort of signal, because I do believe Mizzou cares about baseball. Like, I don't think it's a care issue. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of pride there. Up until Beezer, they had like 3 head coaches, like the entire history of the program or something. They're one of those programs. Like, there's a lot of history there. And to me, it's just disappointing that there isn't kind of more of a sticking, like drawing a line in the sand that says, all right, you know what, we're going to get serious. And maybe, I don't even know what that would be. I don't know what dollar figure that would be, or if it's facilities renovations or whatever, but it's just like, we're getting nothing out of Mizzou baseball above the coach level. Carrick Jackson, I think, is very good about being out there and being in the media, or being, involved and really getting Mizzou baseball out there. I'm talking at the administrative level of we're just getting nothing. from them that says we care and we want Mizzou baseball to be competitive in the SEC. And that's disappointing. So as much as you and I work hard to make sure we cover them without getting jokes off about Taylor Stadium or whatever, at the same time, I do understand it. And it's frustrating that that's the position that Mizzou baseball has been put in by a lack of movement forward from the administration with really any sort of improvement outwardly from the program. Yeah. So anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and all of that, I echo it. Okay. Now, the other part of this is I think they missed their window from a facility standpoint, because now every spare dollar that baseball gets is going to go towards players. It's unless you get it from some private donor and it's earmarked for baseball. I think the facility upgrade, at least the major facility upgrade wagon, if you didn't have it going before all this happened, it's going to be really challenging to get this done. So that's, it's one more thing working against this program at this point. However, depending on how the whole house settlement falls out, maybe they'll have more money, to put towards players and can get people to campus that previously wouldn't have been there, and shrink that gap a little bit. Because there have been years where they were close. If they would have had, maybe it's just 3 or 4 players difference, right? That they have that they were not able to get previously, and they're in the hunt. And honestly, in this league, if you get a couple of difference makers and then surround them with an older guys that don't beat themselves and that know how to play the game, you can hang around and win enough. And if you get into the postseason, I mean, you really like anyone's chances if you got those difference makers who can go out and win a series. So our regional and then a series. So I think it's all there. It's just, to your point, it's got to be a commitment, and we probably need to see how this is going to shake out. And we should know here, in a few months about the house settlement. And then after that, there'll be some adjustment time to see, okay, what does all this mean and how are people going to respond to it? And, maybe it's more players. Maybe they do get some facility upgrades. Maybe it doesn't take, $1 billion investment to do this. Maybe you can get it done, for less than that, and be strategic with it and make it more attractive from a player recruiting standpoint, but also just from an overall branding of the program that's going to help you, turn some heads that help with recruiting. It helps with donors. It helps with fan support. All of these things are intertwined, and I think that's where the focus, I guess that's your larger point, that's where all of this needs to elevate.
Yeah, and it's disappointing from the standpoint too of just baseball's and this is true across the board. It's not just a Mizzou thing. Baseball's a cheap date when it comes to, pick your thing, NIL, facility improve. Like, it's just, for the price of, I was going to name a player, like a football player, but I don't want to do that. For the price of, for the price of 1-star offensive skill player, like you can fund a top 15 baseball roster probably. Now, it's not that easy, right? You got to get the right guys, but like for the cost of one player on the football field, like any team, this goes for any team, like you could just immediately catapult yourself into the competitiveness, into the into the mix with the best of the best, at least on just to be competitive with that group with very little investment. So that's part of what's disappointing is it's just like, gosh, we can't even get to the starting line. It feels like, and some of this is optics, right? Like I'm not so ignorant to, like, I'm sure there are things cooking and they're trying. Like, I'm not saying they're just sitting there twiddling their thumbs, but for me, it's almost like I usually am like, hey, let's not get distracted by the sizzle. Let's talk about the steak. But here I would like some sizzle. Like, I would like there to be some like saber rattling around Mizzou. That's like, hey, here's a list of stuff we're doing for the baseball program, because it's just like in that vacuum without that kind of information, it just opens up the door for a bunch more jokes about Mizzou baseball. So on some level, they're doing it to themselves, where it's just like this information vacuum where we just assume that nothing is ever happening there because we don't hear about it. It doesn't mean there isn't anything happening, but we don't hear about it, and we don't see it in the stadium, right?
Yeah.
We don't see it on the field. And so then we're left to just speculate that there's not a lot of care there. And I think that's probably A, not true, and B, just a result of little communication.
Yeah. And I think the other part of this is the way that Carrick is recruiting. There are a lot of high ceiling freshmen coming in here. He's going to hit on a couple of these, right? And they're going to be dudes. And then everyone else is going to try to poach them, because that's the world we're in now. And can Mizzou keep them? What's their retainment strategy to be able to keep that next burgeoning star that's going to be a guy everyone's talking about? Will he stay? All right, or does he have to take the hometown bargain, to stay, or can they be competitive? Okay, so I think those are. I mean, if you're throwing fastballs at Mizzou, those are the questions that they're going to get.
Yeah, and to put a bow on this, I think there's evidence that, given the opportunity, players want to stick around, like that with Carrick Jackson and his staff, because okay, they lost Logan Lunsford, but you look at last year's team, and pretty much everybody that had eligibility that they would have wanted back came back. Now, granted, it's not a roster where they'd have dozens of players that other teams would covet, but there were guys that I'm sure had options. I mean, and they chose to come back. So there is evidence out there that, like, if you give enough incentive, this coaching staff has players who want to be there. So it's, I don't even think it would take that much convincing, in that case. So anyway, we'll leave that there, because I truly did not. I knew I wanted to touch on that, but I didn't know that you and I would both. If Mark and I have probably just had that bottled up for a while, and that's part of the reason why it came out that way, because we do really try to do right by Mizzou by talking about the on-field stuff and not like buying into some of that other. But on some level, like Mizzou, you got to help yourself, and so that's that. But look, a team, I think they're going to pitch well. It feels like you can set your watch to that. The pitching is going to keep them in games. Like, the one sentence thing is just how good they are comes down to how much more do they hit. Because if they don't hit any more than they did last year, I don't think it really is going to matter a whole lot how good their pitching is. So, that is what it is. All right. That is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Couple programming notes. For one, we will continue this series. We're going to do one episode for all 16 teams as this rolls on. We've got a ton of stuff on the website. SEC Extra, obviously. Also, ACC Extra, if you're interested. If you're already subscribed to SEC Extra, guess what? You have ACC Extra too. Didn't even know it. And so there's that. Thank you to those folks. We have gotten some more reviews on Apple Podcasts for the podcast. I asked for that a couple episodes ago, and I appreciate everyone who has done so. I will also re-up my offer that if you leave a 5-star review and you put a question in the comment as the review, Mark and I will attack it on an episode of the podcast. We'll fit it in either to that team's episode, or if we've already done that episode, we'll fit it in somewhere else. I promise you. So that offer still stands. If you want to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would greatly appreciate that. Okay. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listener, for listening.